Excellent. All right. Well, it's 1 minute after the scheduled start, so I don't know how many people are here. Feel free to say hi in the sidebar. My name is Matt Obert. I'm here representing Drupal Contractors by Esteemed. Very, very excited to be giving my first presentation at one of these Drupal events. I've been coming to them for a long time now, and I've never actually presented anything, so very, very happy about that. And this one's about Drupal behaviors for data protection. So I'm just going to sort of dive right in and try and be a little bit of a time bandit here. Hopefully everybody who wants to see it is arriving now, so you won't miss too much in the first couple of slides. Basically, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but I do have some experience coding custom Drupal modules for data protection, and I can show you what I'm going to do. This is a talk that's primarily going to show you a little overview of these laws, and then dive into some code examples of how we can use JavaScript to enforce data privacy. So, third-party data partners. What about them? They say stuff like the collect code should be placed just before the closing head tag, or the page view code should be placed directly below the head tag following the above tag. And if you see the example here, we've got, you know, a little bit of JavaScript inside these old-fashioned script tags. It says, I've created this example company, the third-party data partner, TPDP Incorporated. So you can see their website is thirdpartydatapartner.com, and they've got this script collect.js, and then in the snippet down below, you see TPDP push, which is like a method that you're calling that's defined in their library that you have to be provided in the head. And this is how we used to do it back in the old days, you know, to inject these tracking codes. But JavaScript snippets are just so 1996, you know. That's how we used to do things in the old days, but really it's not the way. It's not the best way to do these things with Drupal. And if you're a front-end developer, you probably know that it is possible to include these snippets directly in your templates. You can put it right in a Twig template, html.html.twig, and you can put that script tag right in there. But I don't recommend that you do that, and that's what the rest of this talk is going to be about. In this presentation, I'll show you a few different ways of including JavaScript in Drupal projects. But first, let's talk about data protection. I don't know if you guys can read the fortune cookie, but it says, we have updated our privacy policy. By accepting cookies, you agree to be tracked. Learn HTTP 200, okay. This hopefully isn't a meme you've seen in the wild, because I actually had these fortune cookies made when the GDPR came out. A colleague of mine at the agency I worked at the time was giving a presentation similar to this, and I'll give him a shout out in a minute. He's one of the resources on my next slide. When he was going to give this presentation at the Design for Drupal conference in Boston, I surprised everybody in the office by ordering a big box of these fortune cookies. And then he just forgot them on his desk and didn't actually bring them. So I'm the first one to get to use this joke in the presentation about the GDPR. I'm very excited. There aren't really any cookies left. We ate them around the office. But the GDPR, anyway, is a legal framework that sets guidelines for the collection and processing of personal information of individuals within the European Union. This came out back in May of 2018. And the CCPA is the new one. It's in California in the good old United States of America. It's a state statute intended to enhance privacy rights and consumer protection for residents of California in the United States. Remember, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. But let's get to know the GDPR. It covers data privacy. Your IP address is considered personal data. Users can withdraw consent and reserve the right to object to processing. But actually, beyond that, consent is always required. The law requires an explicit opt-in, an actual affirmative action by the user that says, yes, I agree to be tracked. And absent that, it is not legal to track that user. It also has some security provisions. Security should be up to the highest available standards. Security and compliance methods are outlined across 99 articles, and these are enforced by national data protection authorities, one for each country such as the ICO in the UK. Although with Brexit, maybe that's not the best example anymore, but each of these countries has got their own enforcement data protection authority. And the penalties can be quite stiff with the GDPR. They can be fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of the annual revenue of your company. It can be audits and sanctions, and beyond that, consumers have the right to sue. If you guys can get a copy of my slides later, I'll be sure to upload them somewhere, but I did make a tiny URL for it, but after the Google bomb, I'm not sure if tiny URLs are, I shouldn't joke about that. But the top one there, the link presentations, the first one's from DrupalCon in Nashville back in 2018. And it goes into more depth about the legal ramifications of the GDPR. And the next one was the one that I mentioned, designed for Drupal, where my colleague at the time, DJ, did his presentation. And those both go into more depth than I will here. Then the CCPA, also data privacy. IP address is considered personal data. This is something that you definitely have to consider, even if you're not actually tracking people's email addresses and stuff. If you're connecting their user identity with their IP address, then you're tracking them in a way that is covered by these statutes. Again, with the CCPA, you must provide a opt-out link, and this one is DNS MPI. It means do not sell my personal information. So it's a little different from the GDPR, which requires consent, requires an explicit consent, but you have to provide an opt-out. And it says that consent is required for minors and also for people who have previously opted out. And there's a lot of questions right now about how to enforce that. Security requirements are a little bit more lax here. They don't actually explicitly define any security requirements beyond reasonable security, but they do direct you to the CIS controls, which is the Center for Internet Security, as a good example of best practices to follow. And if you don't live up to those standards, consumers can seek damages. And that can be, you can have fines of up to $7,500 for each violation, fines of up to $750 per affected user, and beyond that, the consumers have the right to sue. But this law, unlike the GDPR, applies only to for-profit businesses. So if you've got a business that, if your client does business in the state of California, but they're a nonprofit, you don't need to worry about this compliance with this particular statute. Now, the resources down at the bottom here are a couple of links. One of them is a talk that hasn't happened yet. It's going to be at the Bay Area Drupal Camp next month, and I am already registered for Bad Camp, so I hope to see some of you there online. But this looks like a really good talk, and probably goes into a little more depth than I will, because, again, I'm focusing more on the technical implementation and how you use JavaScript behaviors. And then the other link down there is to the Center for Internet Security and their security reference. So there are contributed Drupal modules right off the shelf that will help you to comply with these laws. This is a partial list. I've omitted modules without a stable release candidate since they're not covered by the Drupal security policy. And there's a clear winner here. I've looked into a few of these here. I had to deal with Cookie Pro for a client recently. It's not my favorite. There's a GDPR compliance module, which is only supported in Drupal 8 right now. It doesn't have a stable release candidate for 9, and it's only used by 961 sites. And that is the second most popular one that I could find on Drupal.org. EU cookie compliance is a clear winner here with 95,676 sites using it last time I checked, and there may be more. If you reload the page right now, I haven't refreshed the slide. So I prefer using the EU cookie compliance module, and I'm not going to talk too much about any of the other ones, but you're welcome to check them out and see how they differ. Certainly, Cookie Pro has something to be said for its the sort of user experience of their website and their cloud-based console that companies can use to control the banners and all the things that you're just basically, this module is just a shim that connects to their back end. EU cookie compliance puts a lot more of the control into Drupal, which is what's going to allow us to use Drupal behaviors. And let's take a look at that. Out of the box, here's just the basic implementation. You install this brand new Composer, require it in your Drupal 9 project, and you'll get this nice little purple banner at the bottom, a consent banner that requires you to click yes, I agree, if you want to be tracked. And if you don't click that, then you can't be tracked. If you don't like purple, that's fine. All these things are very configurable in the back end. It's a super configurable module. They let you change the text. They let you change the colors. They let you change the buttons. They let you link to a security policy, define what that page is. There are a lot of things that are configurable on the back end without writing any custom code. Here's an example, and sorry for the small print, but basically the small print says, when using the opt-in or opt-out consent options, you can block certain JavaScript files from being loaded when consent isn't given. This is a simple configuration, which may be sufficient for compliance without any custom code. And the linked issue queue down at the bottom describes essentially how to disable Google Tag Manager via this method, and then manage all your other scripts with Google Tag Manager, which is a pretty tidy way of getting compliance. Basically, everything that you're injecting, you're handling it with Google Tag Manager in the back end. There's another talk about that going on right now, so if you really want to know more about that, you can just switch to the other room. But this is a really tidy way of just toggling Google Tag Manager on with this basic configuration, and you don't need to write any custom code. But a lot of the time, there's more to it than that. And because there may be more logic, that custom logic that you're dealing with for your tracking, EU cookie compliance module provides the hasAgreed behavior, which you can see an example of how to use this on the screen right now. It's a Drupal behavior which you can use in your own custom code to detect whether consent has been granted. But wait. What's a behavior, and how can a module provide one? Drupal's version of document ready is basically Drupal behavior. It's just a way of wrapping your JavaScript that you want to run in a little bit of syntactic sugar that tells it how to attach itself and when it should be run. Now, the examples on screen show that Drupal behaviors have been with us since Drupal 6. And that's the style down at the bottom where you're setting your behavior name equal to a function, and your custom JavaScript goes inside the function. Starting with Drupal 7, you could do a little bit more with it. You're defining Drupal behaviors behavior name as an object, and that object has to have at least an attach method. And then Drupal goes ahead and checks for all of the behaviors that you've registered with this Drupal behaviors object and runs their attach method. There's the additional resources you see at the bottom are the Ben Marshall site there, tells a real kind of historical perspective on how Drupal JavaScript API evolved over the years, going back, basically he goes back to Drupal 6. And the Lullaby article is the classic on the topic. I've read that so many times when I was trying to wrap my head around this as a newbie. The Lullaby article explains exactly what I'm about to go through here, and it does a really good job of it. So even if you can't find my slides later, Google the Lullaby article, Understanding JavaScript Behaviors in Drupal, and that will be one of the top hits. It's very, very helpful. Although I think as a newbie, I found it a little bit confusing to read that article without actually going in and having some code examples that I was running. So to that end, let's just move on and see the characteristics of a behavior. Behaviors provide an easy way to initialize JavaScript on page loads and reinitialize on AJAX calls. This may not be something that you need for your tracking behaviors, but it certainly can be useful with DOM elements that you're manipulating, sometimes with things that don't exist when the page is loaded and are injected by an AJAX callback, and then you want to invoke behaviors on things at the moment that they're instantiated in the DOM. So behaviors are very sophisticated. We're not going to get too much into this. In fact, what I'm about to show you in the next couple of slides is how to disable some of those advanced functionality of the behaviors so that you can use it in a more simple way and just fire it off once when the page is loaded or when the element that you want to attach it to is loaded. So as I mentioned a little bit in the last slide, the Drupal Behaviors object is a property of the Drupal object, and we extend this object to add new behaviors to our module. And then each new object that we register with Drupal Behaviors in this way needs to have at least an attach method, and I will show you a little bit more detail about that. Then Drupal itself calls the Drupal.attachBehaviors method, which iterates through all the behavior objects and calls their respective attach methods. And behaviors, this is where it gets really interesting. They accept context and settings as arguments. Context contains exactly the DOM elements that your behavior will have the choice of acting on. It could be the entire DOM, or it could just be a subset after an AJAX call. And settings are going to allow us to do some cool tricks where we can pass values from the Drupal backend to our behaviors in the client-side JavaScript. So let's see, we're going to attach a function here, Drupal.behaviors.my_custom_module_body attach. Now what I've done here is, rather than, as the EU cookie compliance skipped that name behaviors and they just had Drupal.EU cookie compliance for their module, that's a little bit more complicated. You can do it that way. You can register your behaviors in that way, but that means that you need to call Drupal.attachBehaviors yourself. I'm not going to show how to do that. It's a little bit more advanced. You can certainly look it up. The advantage of doing it this way with this pattern is if you just put Drupal.behaviors and then the name of a behavior, that's going to fire off automatically every time Drupal.attachBehaviors is called. And the first time it's called, context, which is being passed here, and that's the one that's highlighted because this is syntax highlighting just from a PHP storm, but you can see that context is lit up because we're actually using it. Settings is kind of grayed out because I'm not showing you how to use that yet. And the first time you call Drupal, you're not calling it Drupal, the backend is going to fire off Drupal.attachBehaviors and pass the entire DOM into the context. And then on subsequent calls, it's going to just pass into the context a smaller piece of HTML that is available for your behavior to attach itself to elements in. And that makes this a lot more flexible in how it can be used. And also it makes it a little bit more efficient in its use of resources. So if you're not using AJAX, though, you may only want to attach your behavior once for each DOM element that matches your selector. And you can see that on the screen, but I'll go into a little more detail in another slide that's coming right up. So you got your third-party data partner. Remember them? They're saying, oh, your collect code should be placed just before the head tag, and the page view code should be placed directly below the head tag. But you don't need to do it the 1996 way anymore. Here's hook page attachments. This is going to go in your .module file. So my_custom_module is a directory, and inside there is my_custom_module.module. And you're going to put this hook page attachments implementation in there. This is a standard Drupal hook. If you guys are here for an intermediate talk, hopefully you already know how to set up your own custom module. And I should point out also that these things can also be attached in the front end in the theme layer, but I'm not really showing that in this talk. So this example shows how to attach script type text JavaScript element via hook page attachments. And you can see that rather than just putting the raw markup in a Twig template, you're actually passing it as, you know, this is like a Drupal render array. But this isn't necessarily the best way to do it. What we've got now in Drupal is libraries. So in this example, the externally hosted collect code is defined instead as an externally hosted and minified library. The data partner said they wanted the collect code in the header, so we put header:true in the YAML. And then the page view code will be defined as a behavior in the tpdp.js file, which is going to live in our module inside of the JS directory. And that may contain as many libraries as we, that file, I'm sorry, it says in my notes that it may contain as many libraries as we need. It may contain as many behaviors as we need. So this is how you define it in a library. This goes in your libraries.yaml file for your module. And then you can attach these libraries as needed. And here's also the additional resources on here. This is just the Drupal documentation on the JavaScript API and how we attach libraries either from a module or from a theme. And they go into a lot more detail there. So this is basically a lot simpler than the other way of, there's a little bit more setup for it, but now the code is very, very legible. When you go to your hook page attachments, you say, oh, I want to attach this JavaScript library, and boom, you put my custom module /TPDP. That refers to the YAML, which then tells what JavaScript file or files or other things can be in the library. CSS can be in your library. That all gets attached right here. It's very, very cool. And this is the preferred method of managing JavaScript assets in Drupal. Now, this is how you define a behavior in a text file in your custom module library. All JavaScript behaviors must be declared inside a closure wrapping the whole file. So it's where it starts at the top with function, and then the $, and then Drupal settings, and then at the end, after the closing parentheses, it says jQuery, Drupal settings. You're gonna wrap all of your behaviors inside of this closure, which, ask Shane from Gatsby about closures, but essentially that's just because in JavaScript, scope is wacky and it can be leaky and there can be all kinds of issues with JavaScript scope. And this is how Drupal requires you to declare your behaviors. Behaviors are declared as objects and they must have an attach method. I said that before. And then the next line selects a DOM element within the context which your behavior will attach to. And let's take a closer look at this. Selector, context. Try substituting div for body here, and you'll see that the behavior runs once for each div in the DOM. And I don't want to stay here too long because I think I'm running out of time. But this is an example of how you would just fire off once each. So this attaches your behavior once to each element matching the selector. And then selector can be any selector used to identify any DOM element, class ID element, pseudo element, etc. Here's another cool trick you can do to prevent your behavior from executing more than once. It's basically, I found this in a module and I've just sort of bookmarked it ever since, but this will fire only once on document load. And come back and refer to my slides if you want to see that again. Here's your settings. This is the meat of the talk, and I'm just getting to it with 5 minutes left. But essentially, when we attach our libraries, we also can pass values to Drupal settings. But we're not using that here yet. As you see, it's grayed out. Here's hook page attachments, where we actually dynamically set a value. So what you can see here is essentially this example uses Acquia Cloud environment variables to determine whether to use sandbox or production org ID values. So the function says if is set these environment variables that say I'm in an Acquia Cloud production environment. Then if that is set and returns true, you set the org ID to the production one. Otherwise, use the sandbox API. And once we've attached that value, you see where it says attached Drupal settings, and then you give it a namespace, my custom module. And I put another thing in case I have a couple of different APIs, and then the org ID, and I'm passing it there. And we'll be able to catch that from the other end. Here we are looking for it in Drupal. First, we check hasAgreed, which came from EU cookie compliance. I'm checking to see that Drupal EU cookie compliance is even there. And then I'm checking to see that hasAgreed returns true. If that's false, I bail out. Otherwise, I go on and I actually attach the collect code, and I'm able to pass the dynamically assigned value of my custom module settings.mycustommodule.tpdp.org ID. And I'm setting that dynamically here. I have so many slides. I'm sorry, guys. I am going to run out of time for questions. So here's This is how to do it with cookies. You check for compliance. And then I'm using here the new, the JS cookie implementation, which is in core now instead of jQuery cookie. And there's a major effort to remove jQuery dependencies from Drupal core. I'm not really going to have much time to get into any of this. This is what happens if you actually use the hasAgreed with Google Analytics the way that they say to in Google's instructions. It's actually going to load the code from Google, and it's going to give Google that IP address. And not only that, the client is going to see that they downloaded a tracking code and set a value that says, don't pass any tracking data. But isn't there another way to do that without getting Google in the middle of it? Do we really trust Google? This is a bit more compliant because it gets the opt-out JavaScript from Drupal rather than from Google. And it's just another way of wrapping this in the EU cookie compliance hasAgreed consent behavior. And I put the additional resource to the Google docs there. So this is just a little bit more compliant way. But what if your client is paranoid and really wants to enforce extreme compliance with these rules, and they just don't want the scripts to run at all unless someone has given their consent? I can actually show how to do this. I feel like I'm going to be out of time. It says I got 3 minutes left, but here's my Stack Exchange answer. Guys, if you guys can go to this link on the screen, drupal.stackexchange.com, and the numbers there, that will allow you to, I'll paste that into the chat, but essentially that will, the rest of my slides are pretty well explained there. But what you can do is take out the script entirely, replace it with a wrapper like you see on the screen. You remove all the JavaScript tracking snippets completely, put something else where you want to eject them, and then locate all those elements and bail out if you don't find any on the page. So this is a way to do that just with vanilla JavaScript. And then you iterate. This is way too fast. I'm sorry. You guys don't really have time to read this. I'll have to put it in like a GitHub gist or something. But this is an array prototype for each call where you iterate through all this markup. And for each of the placeholder divs, you're going to say, oh, okay, like I'm going to check and see basically whether this 4-digit ID number corresponds to something that I've stored in the back end. And then if it does, I inject that. And if it doesn't, I've got like some other placeholder content. And so this is how you do it. This is how you stop it from running completely unless they've given consent. I got a minute and a half. You guys can start asking questions. If you start typing questions, I will try to answer as many. And then this is going to be my last thing that I talk about. I'm not super familiar with this. This is something that Cookie Pro recommended, but it's a variation of the same thing. It's called JavaScript type rewriting. So essentially, you use the same way that we were able to attach the script, only instead of saying type text JavaScript, you say script type text plain. Now it won't execute until the JavaScript finds it, ideally with the class that you've attached to it as well, class third-party script wrapper. And it's going to find each of those after consent is given, and it's going to flip text plain to text JavaScript, enabling all of those scripts. So remember, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. In general, the best practice is to code for the strictest interpretation of the applicable statutes. If your client is looking for a loophole, have them consult with their legal department. And don't be afraid to raise a flag if you feel that your client is exposing you to legal liability. Any questions? I am going to see whether I have the question thing and I figure out how this works. I'm seeing an ask a question button at the bottom, but I'm not seeing any questions yet, guys. So let me know if you got any questions, and I'm gonna minimize this. Let's see. If there are no questions, we probably are gonna run out of time in a minute, but I'm hoping that essentially that we have enough time for questions, because I think I set the timer for only 30 minutes, which actually probably I rushed through the end. Here we go. if there's no questions, I can go back into a little bit more detail with the slides that I rushed through, because I set the timer for only 30 to allow time for questions, and you can tell I haven't done a lot of these. I'm sure my next one will be a little bit better timed. I have not watched all of Better Call Saul. I have watched all of Breaking Bad, and I believe I have seen all of Mr. Show as well. So I go way back with Bob Odenkirk. But thanks for your comments off to the side. I'm seeing people congratulating me. I am going to go back and take another look in a little bit more depth at those last 3 slides in case people want to see that. Because, can I do that now? Anyway, I minimized the thing. Let's see this. Once it's got focus, I can use the arrow keys. So let's go back to this. Paranoid compliance. We're going to start with div ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4. That actually corresponds to the slides. I'm going to post. Somebody told me that the link didn't work, but yeah, the sessions are recorded, and the very first slide does have the link. I'm going to post it in here if I can just figure out how to cut and paste from somewhere that I have it. Here we go. That's doot. There may be like a permission issue with this. Chris's business partner, Albert Volkman, was not able to see the slides here. Some other people that I shared it with have been able to see it, so your mileage may vary here, but now let's see what's going on. I put my session in the background. Guys, here you go. Whew, blog post time. This is, I'm taking the tiny URL out of the middle here. I'm just going to put the direct link, if I can find it, to beautiful.ai. I believe that will work. You guys test that out and let me know if you can see the slides there. So essentially, yeah, this is my Stack Exchange answer. And if you guys, if this answer is useful, please upvote. Honestly, this is what I'm hoping to get out of this. I'm not getting paid or anything, but I'm hoping people give me some of that sweet, sweet karma on Stack Exchange. It's already my top voted question, but I feel like it could do better. I do think it's a helpful technique. So you start with your third-party form wrapper class, which is what you're going to be scanning for. And in this instance, each of these IDs is going to be a unique number that corresponds to a unique ID that exists in the third-party data partner. This is actually based, I suppose I can say without violating any kind of NDA or anything, that this is based on Marketo forms. But it would work for, there's so many different tracking and CRM type of things. Oh, there's a better link. Look at that. There's a better link, guys. I am going to have to copy that link for when I share it. I'm copying it right now. So this is the meat of the thing, is where we go through the for each call, and it's going to look, well, first of all, I guess it was the previous slide was where, boy, oh boy. Previous slide is the one where you, gosh, come on, guys. I feel like I'm losing control. Here we go. I'm going to use this button instead of the arrow keys. This is where you get elements by class name. You're looking for the class name third-party form wrapper, and it's going to put all of those things into, like, I guess it's not an array technically in JavaScript. This is like a collection. And then you're going to check that the length of that doesn't equal 0, and that would mean it was empty and it didn't find anything. And if it didn't find anything, it's going to bail out. But if it did find something, and it probably will find more than one thing, Sorry, guys, that's my phone. So if it may find multiple things on the same page, you may have multiple divs. In this case, it was a bunch of Marketo forms, essentially, that I was injecting into the page. And each one had the unique ID. And you can see in the middle where it says, if has agreed, markup plus equals form ID, and then the string TPDP form underscore, and then this LID, which is a property of this element that I've already defined. But essentially, it's going to concatenate that ID that we found in the HTML with the boilerplate to make that into the unique identifier for the third-party data partner. And then I'm using getScript, which is another kind of JavaScript trick to reach out and pull that collect.js script from the third-party data partner. So that's the example. That's the advanced example. I was thinking of, there's even one more advanced example that I thought of, which is happening to me now with a client where there's a backend API which just does a RESTful API to like a Salesforce Marketing Cloud thing, and we want to. It only exists in a Drupal 8 service class, so that stuff isn't available to the JavaScript, and it would be possible in the service class to write it to a cookie using Guzzle HTTP has a friendly way to write it to a cookie, but I didn't know how to actually check for consent before doing that. So there's a trick where you can sort of implement flash storage just using PHP. I guess there's a way to write it to the session with the Drupal APIs as well. And you basically will write a value to the session in such a way that you're going to read it and delete it at the same time. And then what that'll do is take something in your service class, you write it to the flash storage, and then back in your .module file outside of the object-oriented Symfony kind of stuff and back in the old school procedural hooks of Drupal, you actually will be able to read that from your flash storage and erase it. It's not a good place to store any personally identifiable data, which would be like, then you get into HIPAA and stuff. But in my case, I'm just going to use it with a unique identifier that's just a UUID that I'm generating, and I'm handing it out to each person who fills out this form in my service class. And then you can pass it to the flash storage and get it out of the flash storage in the module. I didn't make any slides about that because I really didn't think I would get to it. But does anybody have any more questions? I can't see like for sure what the question part of the interface is. I'm hoping that if somebody actually hits the ask a question button, that it will pop up something that I can see, because otherwise I just see the sidebar, which is nice for chatting. So there we go. And that's Drupal behaviors for data protection. Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, there are none. Nobody had any questions. I explained this so well. Well, go back to the joke that I skipped over so fast with the Black Sabbath. It said down at the bottom in the slides, fair use of copyrighted material as provided for in Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Law. Hopefully that's true. I don't know. I'm not an intellectual property lawyer specialist, so hopefully I don't get sued by Warner Brothers for using the paranoid joke. So that's it. I'll go all the way back to Better Call Saul, and I will check and see if anybody else. We're in the last 5 minutes. It seems like it was a pretty successful talk. Thank you all for coming. And hopefully you all took a little something away from that, little knowledge of the legal code and also of the JavaScript code and even a little PHP code that's involved in a very strict implementation. If you've got a client that doesn't need a strict implementation, you can play a little fast and loose, but I recommend that you don't try to skirt the law altogether. The thing about the GDPR in particular is that people think they can get around it by geolocation and geo IP stuff, but really you can't, because if somebody was a European national from Germany or something, and they come to the United States and they're sitting in a hotel room in New York or LA, and they get online, they've got an IP address from the United States, but they're still a European national and the law applies to them. So you really can't get around the GDPR the way it's written. Again, they're looking for the big money fines. They're just looking for flagrant violators, large companies that are really violating the rules in a flagrant way. But so there you go. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. I think we're going to wrap it up. We'll stay here for, 3-4 more minutes. But basically, that's the talk. I hope it got recorded. I didn't do anything to record it. I didn't see a button that I was supposed to mash to record it, so hopefully someone else took care of that. And also shout out to Chris and Albert at Drupal Contractors for hooking me up with this opportunity. Shout out to Kareem and everybody from DrupalCamp Atlanta for putting this on. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Shane from Gatsby for his great talks, and the guy from Digital Echidna. I can't remember his name right now, but I have their Drupal stress ball from conference swag, and I'm so happy. This gets me through a lot of deadlines. It comes in handy. So excellent. I will be able to point people to the recording when it goes online. And thank you all for hosting and for having me. I think this is the problem with doing the technical talks, is that people sometimes they just don't have a specific question about the actual code. But if you have any other general questions, I guess we got just enough time for one about just the legal implications of these. You'll find yourself, companies tend to want to do as much tracking as they can get away with. And I find that agencies find themselves sometimes in a role where they have to advise because they don't want to expose themselves to liability. You got to have a data protection officer at your agency, or certainly if you're in business for yourself as a freelancer, you don't want to expose yourself to the liability, particularly with the GDPR. I know we're on the East Coast here, but California that's a new thing, and that's all uncharted waters. And I'm really psyched to go to Badcamp and see what the people that are a little bit more clued in about that have to say. I certainly will give a more informed presentation next time because I will have seen that. So. All right. Well, thanks all for coming, and I feel like that might be all I have to say. There may have been a technical. Oh, now there's ask a question. There's two. My goodness. Oh, geez. With 1 minute left to go. Where did I get the cool shirt? I got it from Chris McGrath. How has my experience been working with Drupal contractors? Fantastic. They treat people really well. The clients have been great. I've been really well compensated for my work. It's been wonderful, actually, and I'm hoping to continue working with them for many, many more jobs to come. Oh, excellent. Chris is going to do a freelancing talk at Badcamp. I will be there. I'm there. I've already registered for Badcamp. I'm so excited. Excellent. And we are down to the last minute, and then they're going to turn the page on us. Thanks, everyone. I've really enjoyed this experience, and I hope to see you all at the next talk. Boom. Us too. Yes. Excellent. Very, very happy. 30 seconds. Here we go. I don't have my coffee or anything. All right, guys. This just about wraps it up. We're doing the countdown. 10, 9. They're going to take us right out of the channel.